The rain fell in heavy sheets, hammering against the metallic walls of the ruined outpost. Jace moved quickly through the muddy ground, his boots sinking into the wet earth. The air was cold and thick with the smell of smoke and burning fuel. His pulse was steady, but his eyes scanned every shadow for movement. The battle had ended hours ago, but the danger had not. Bodies lay scattered across the field, both human and alien. Sparks hissed from broken machinery, and puddles rippled with every drop of rain. Somewhere in the wreckage, a faint cough reached his ears. Jace turned toward the sound, moving with caution. When he found her, she was lying on her back near the shelter of a half-collapsed wall. Her green skin slick with rainwater, her armor was dented and scorched, the chest plate rising and falling in shallow breaths. Silver white hair clung to her face, and her bright eyes were half closed. She looked at him, her voice weak but clear enough to cut through the rain. "Help me," she said. "I can't breathe." Jace knelt beside her, assessing the damage. The seals on her armor were locked tight, pressing against her chest like a vice. "You're going to be fine," he said, though his hands were already working at the release mechanism. The alien design was unfamiliar, the joints hidden beneath layers of reinforced plating. She reached up with a trembling hand, gripping his wrist. "You have to take it off," she gasped. "If you don't, I will suffocate." Her urgency pushed him to move faster, fingers searching for the hidden catches. A burst of static crackled in his earpiece. His comms were still active, meaning his squad might be listening. But in this moment, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was freeing her from the armor. He found the first release and twisted hard. The metal hissed as the pressure seal broke, releasing a thin trail of steam into the rain. She inhaled sharply, her shoulders relaxing slightly. He worked on the second clasp, rainwater streaming down his arms. Her eyes stayed locked on him, a mix of fear and trust in her gaze. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because you asked," he said simply. "And because leaving you here isn't an option." The final clasp came loose, and the chest plate shifted just enough for her to draw in a deep, unrestrained breath. The relief in her expression was immediate. She let her head fall back, the tension easing from her body. Jace carefully lifted the plate away and set it aside, revealing the layers of fabric and light armor beneath. "Better?" he asked. She nodded once, closing her eyes briefly before looking at him again. "You saved my life," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We're still in enemy territory." The rain pounded harder and lightning flashed in the distance. He glanced around the outpost, noting the exposed positions and the lack of cover. "We need to move," he said. "Can you walk?" She tried to sit up, wincing as her side tightened. "I can," she said, though her voice lacked certainty. Jace slid an arm under her shoulders, helping her to her feet. She leaned on him more than she wanted to admit. They made their way toward a makeshift shelter at the edge of the camp. The ground was slippery, forcing them to move slowly. Every step was accompanied by the hiss of rain on metal and the distant rumble of thunder. By the time they reached the shelter, both were soaked through. Jace guided her inside and set her down on a crate, taking a moment to catch his breath. She looked at him again, her expression unreadable. "You are human," she said. "Yes," he replied, "and you are not my enemy." Her lips curved slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was a smile or something else. "Perhaps not," she said. The rain outside drowned out the rest of the world, leaving only the two of them in the dim light of the shelter, watching each other across the narrow space. The shelter's roof was little more than a torn sheet of metal, but it kept most of the rain out. Jace crouched near the opening, scanning the ruined outpost for movement. His rifle rested across his lap, ready if anything appeared. Behind him, the alien woman sat quietly, her breathing steadier now that the armor's chest plate was gone. He could hear her shifting slightly on the crate, the sound of wet fabric moving against metal. "You fight well," she said finally. Her voice carried a strength that had been missing earlier. Jace didn't turn to look at her. "I fight because I have to," he replied. "And because if I don't, I won't live to see tomorrow." She seemed to think about that before speaking again. "We are alike in that way." Jace glanced over his shoulder. She was watching him closely, her silver hair falling over one shoulder, the rainwater still glistening in its strands. "What's he?" "Your name?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Lyra." He nodded once. "Jace." The exchange was simple, but something in the way she said his name carried weight, as if committing it to memory. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke. Jace's eyes narrowed. "We're not alone." Lyra straightened. "Hunters?" He nodded. "Could be." He reached into his pack, pulling out a small scanner. The screen flickered to life, showing faint movement near the far side of the outpost. "They're searching the wreckage." "We have time, but not much." Lyra's hand tightened on the edge of the crate. "We should move now," she said. Jace shook his head. "If we leave too soon, we'll run right into them. Better to wait until they pass, then slip out behind them." She frowned but didn't argue. He appreciated that. Too many people thought speed was the same as safety. In his experience, patience often saved more lives than quick action. The minutes passed slowly. Outside, the rain softened to a steady drizzle. Jace kept his eyes on the scanner, noting the faint blips moving through the wreckage. Lyra leaned forward, her gaze following his. "They are close," she murmured. He nodded. "Another minute." His voice was low, but steady. She didn't move, waiting for his signal. Finally, the blips began to fade from the display as the figures moved deeper into the outpost. "Now," Jace said. He rose to his feet, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. Lyra stood as well, her movements careful but quick. They stepped out into the damp air, keeping low as they moved between broken walls and scattered debris. The path to the outer edge of the outpost was narrow, with puddles forming in the uneven ground. They moved in silence, every sound amplified. In the wet air, Jace kept scanning ahead, looking for any sign of movement. Lyra followed close behind, her eyes scanning the shadows. When they reached the perimeter fence, Jace found a section already torn open. "Through here," he whispered. They slipped through the gap, emerging into the open field beyond. The ground here was softer, the grass slick from the rain. In the distance, dark hills rose against the gray sky. Jace set their course toward them. "If we reach those hills, we can disappear before they know we're gone." Lyra matched his pace without complaint, her steps quiet and sure. Halfway across the field, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Jace froze, his head snapping toward the sound. 3 figures emerged from the mist behind them, their armor dark and gleaming, weapons in hand. "Move," Jace said, his voice firm. They broke into a run, the wet grass slipping under their boots. Shots cracked through the air, bolts of energy striking the ground around them. They reached the base of the hills, just as another volley of fire hit the rocks above. Jace pulled Lyra into a narrow crevice, the stone walls shielding them from view. "Stay down," he said. Lyra's breathing was fast but controlled. "They will not stop," she warned. Jace checked his rifle, the sound of his movements loud. "In the confined space." "Neither will I," he said, his eyes locked on the path ahead. The crevice was narrow and dark, but it gave them a few moments to breathe. Rainwater dripped from the rocks above, soaking the ground beneath them. Jace pressed his back against the stone, his rifle resting across his knees. Lyra crouched a short distance away, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows at the mouth of the crevice. The sound of footsteps grew faint, then faded entirely. Jace waited, counting slowly in his head. Only when he reached 30 did he move toward the opening. "Clear," he said quietly. Lyra rose to her feet, her movements as fluid as a trained fighter. She adjusted the straps on her remaining armor and stepped out into the open. The hills offered more cover than the flat fields they had crossed. Jagged rocks rose in uneven lines, creating narrow paths and blind corners. Jace led the way, his boots finding steady ground on the wet stone. Lyra followed closely, her gaze shifting from the path to the horizon. The storm had begun to thin, but the sky remained a dull gray. They moved in silence for some time, conserving their energy. When they reached a plateau, Jace stopped and crouched low. He scanned the valley below, spotting a cluster of small structures built against the rock. Thin trails of smoke curled from the chimneys. "Shelter," he said, nodding toward the buildings. Lyra stepped beside him, her silver hair catching the dim light. "If they are friendly," she replied. Jace started down the slope, careful to keep their approach slow and quiet. The structures grew clearer as they neared. They were simple, built from stone and metal scraps, but sturdy enough to stand against the wind. As they reached the first building, a door creaked open and an older alien stepped into view. His skin was pale blue, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Travelers," he said, his voice deep. "We need a place to rest," Jace replied. The older alien studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Inside." He stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The room was small but warm, lit by a single lantern hanging from the ceiling. A fire burned in a corner hearth, the scent of cooked roots filling the air. Lyra closed the door behind them, glancing around the space. The older alien gestured toward a bench. "Sit, you are wet and cold." Jace sat down, feeling the heat from the fire soak into his skin. Lyra removed the last piece of her damaged armor, setting it gently on the floor. Without the heavy plating, her frame seemed lighter though her presence remained commanding. The older alien noticed the gesture but said nothing. Jace leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We were attacked near the outpost. Armed patrols are searching the area." The older alien nodded slowly. "I have seen them pass before. They hunt without reason. You are lucky to have made it here." He moved toward a small shelf and pulled down 2 mugs, filling them with steaming liquid from a kettle. "Drink, it will help," he said. The warmth of the drink spread through Jace's chest as he swallowed. Lyra took hers with both hands, sipping carefully. For a brief moment, the tension eased, replaced by the quiet crackle of the fire. "Thank you," she said to their host. He inclined his head. "Rest tonight. Leave at first light. The patrols will not search the high ridges during the early hours." Jace gave a short nod. As the night deepened, the older alien settled into a chair near the fire, his eyes half closed. Jace moved to the far wall, where a narrow cot stood against the stone. He sat down, cleaning his rifle with practiced motions. Lyra remained seated near the hearth, her gaze fixed on the flames. There was something in her expression calm, but edged with thought. "You still do not trust me," she said quietly. Jace paused in his work, meeting her eyes. "Trust has to be earned." She gave the faintest of smiles. "Then I will earn it." Her voice carried no challenge, only certainty. For the first time since they had met, Jace felt the weight of her words linger in the silence. The fire had burned low by the time Jace opened his eyes. The air inside the small shelter was warm, carrying the faint scent of ash. He sat up slowly, checking his gear before glancing toward the hearth. Lyra was already awake, seated near the doorway with her blade across her knees. She looked at him, her silver hair catching the glow from the embers. "You are ready," she said, not as a question but as a statement. Jace nodded once. The older alien stirred in his chair, opening his eyes to watch them. "The ridge path is dangerous," he warned. But if you move quickly, you may pass before the patrols spread out again. Jace stood and adjusted the strap on his rifle. Lyra rose as well, sliding her blade into place. They stepped outside into the cold morning air. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky a pale shade of blue. The ground was slick with rainwater, and the mountains beyond loomed under a thin mist. Jace took the lead, moving toward the narrow path the older alien had described. Lyra followed close behind, her eyes sharp for any movement. The ridge path was little more than a ledge carved into the rock face. On one side, the cliff rose steeply. On the other, it dropped into a deep ravine where a thin river wound through the rocks. The sound of rushing water echoed upward, masking their footsteps. Jace moved steadily, testing each step before putting his weight down. Lyra's light movements matched his pace. Halfway across the ridge, they froze at the sound of voices ahead. 2 armored patrol soldiers stood blocking the path, their weapons slung over their shoulders. Jace held up a hand to signal Lyra to stop. They crouched low against the cliff wall listening. The soldiers spoke in a language Jace did not understand, but their tone carried tension. Lyra leaned closer and whispered, "They are discussing a search grid." Jace considered their options. The ledge was too narrow to pass unnoticed. Retreating would mean losing hours. He looked to Lyra, and she met his gaze without hesitation. "I can distract them," she said quietly. Jace shook his head. "We take them together." Lyra gave a faint nod, tightening her grip on her blade. On Jace's count, they moved forward as one. The first soldier turned at the sound of their approach, but he had no time to raise his weapon. Jace struck with the butt of his rifle, knocking the soldier against the cliff wall. Lyra engaged the second, her blade flashing in the morning light. The fight was swift, the outcome certain. Both soldiers lay unconscious, their weapons kicked aside. Jace dragged them to the wall, ensuring they would not fall into the ravine. They continued along the path, quickening their pace now that the way was clear. The ridge curved sharply ahead, and as they rounded it, the land opened into a vast plateau. From here, they could see the distant city, a cluster of tall spires and glowing lights, still many hours away. Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes fixed on the sight. "That is where my mission ends," she said. Jace glanced at her. "And mine?" She did not look away from the horizon. "Yours will depend on what you choose when we arrive." Her words carried a weight that stirred questions, but there was no time to ask them now. They descended from the plateau into a stretch of sparse forest, the shadows deepening under the rising sun. The forest floor was soft, the damp leaves muffling their steps. Birds with sharp metallic calls darted between branches. Somewhere far off, a low howl rolled through the air. Jace kept his rifle ready, scanning the undergrowth. Lyra moved beside him with quiet precision, her hand never far from her weapon. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of wet earth and resin. As they walked, Lyra spoke without turning her head. "When you removed my armor yesterday, you saved more than my breath. You saved my chance to finish what I started." Jace kept his eyes on the path ahead. "And what exactly did you start?" She was silent for a moment before answering. "A fight that may end with me, or with both of us." Her voice was steady, but her grip on the blade tightened. The forest thinned as the land began to slope upward toward the city. The spires in the distance glimmered faintly under the morning sun, their metal surfaces catching the light. Jace adjusted the strap of his rifle and kept his pace steady. Lyra walked beside him, her eyes scanning both the horizon and the trees around them. As they drew closer, the road became more defined. Old stone slabs jutted from the ground, half covered in moss, leading toward a fortified gate. Figures moved along the walls above, their silhouettes marked by the glint of armor. Jace slowed, taking in the structure. "How many guards?" he asked quietly. Lyra's gaze lingered on the wall. Enough to notice if we walk in without a plan. They stopped behind a cluster of boulders a short distance from the gate. Lyra crouched, tracing a rough map in the dirt with the tip of her blade. There is a side entrance. It is rarely used, but we will need to move quickly to reach it before the next patrol passes. Jace studied the route she marked. And once we're inside, she looked up at him. We go to the central tower. That is where my objective lies. The timing had to be perfect. They waited until the main gate patrol shifted positions, then slipped from behind the boulders. Moving low, they kept to the shadows cast by the outer walls. The side entrance was little more than a reinforced door set into the stone, half hidden by overgrown vines. Lyra pressed a sequence into the control panel, and with a faint click, the door opened. Inside, the air was cooler, the light dimmer. Narrow corridors wound through the lower levels, the stone floors worn smooth by years of use. Jace kept his rifle ready, his steps silent. Lyra led the way with confidence, turning through a series of passages until they emerged into a wide chamber. At the far end, a spiral staircase rose toward the tower above. They began to climb, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Halfway up, a pair of armored soldiers appeared at the top of the stairs. Jace reacted first, raising his rifle. The shots echoed in the tight space, and both soldiers fell before they could sound an alarm. Lyra didn't break stride, stepping over them as they continued upward. At the top, they entered a large circular room filled with glowing consoles and a massive table covered in holographic maps. In the center stood a tall figure in ornate armor, his helmet polished to a mirror sheen. Lyra stepped forward, her voice cold. "You know why I'm here." The figure removed his helmet, revealing sharp features and pale eyes. "You will not succeed," he said. Jace moved to flank him, keeping the rifle aimed. "You can surrender, or we end this now." The man's gaze shifted to Jace, then back to Lyra. "You brought a human into this. Bold and foolish." Lyra's grip tightened on her blade. "He saved my life. Now he will help me take yours." With a swift motion, she closed the distance, striking with precision. The clash was fast, each movement sharp and deliberate. The fight ended with the man falling to his knees, his weapon clattering to the floor. Lyra stepped back, breathing hard. "It's done," she said. Jace lowered his rifle but kept his attention on the room. "Then we leave before more arrive." She nodded, moving to the central console. Her fingers danced across the controls, shutting down systems and wiping data. "No one else will use this place against us," she said. They retraced their steps down the tower, slipping back through the corridors and out the side entrance. The city walls loomed behind them as they crossed into the open hills. The air outside felt lighter, the danger fading with each step. Lyra glanced at Jace, her expression unreadable. "You could have walked away many times," she said. "But you didn't." Jace met her gaze. "I don't leave people behind." The spires of the city were now distant against the brightening sky. Lyra adjusted her cloak and looked ahead. "Then wherever this path leads, you will walk it with me." Jace gave a short nod, his rifle resting easily at his side. Together they moved on, their steps steady, the bond between them forged in battle and choice.